specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition, and welcome to Midday with Reverend Don. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, we can communicate directly. If you type your comments or questions into whatever platform you might be watching the show on. And I find that one of the better parts of this particular broadcast that we can do that. If you have anything you want to talk about, feel free to ask. If there's anything you want to say, feel free to say it. And I enjoy spending this time with you. Today, I was going to start talking about the fall of the year, about Mabon and Samhain, as we head into the fall of the year and the holidays associated with it. And hello to Raven in the chat room. And Raven says, Happy Moon Day, Reverend Don. And Happy Moon Day to you, Raven. And I wanted to talk about what these holidays mean and also about death in the spirit world. And I think I'm probably going to be talking as we head into October. And admittedly, we're not in October quite yet, but it's coming. But I wanted to talk a bit about death and the spirit world. Hello, Lynn, in the chat room. It's good to see you, Lynn. And hello, Kai. It's good to see you, Kai. And it was good to see you at the Parliament of the World's Religions. Having spent most of my life working as a medium, working with the spirits of the dead, I have quite a bit to say about it. And also having come into the last portion of my life, I have quite a bit to think about it. And, you know, I don't know, when I say the last portion of my life, that doesn't mean that I'm talking about the last few days. I could live for another week, another year, another 10 years, even another 20 years. But even if I live for another 20 years, that would be 1/4 of my total life, only the last portion of it. And it seems to me that when you come to that part of your life, you need to be thinking about what you've done, what you still want to do, what you're leaving behind. So that's one of the things we may talk about also. And about the nature of spirit and what we expect from spirit. When we look at the wheel of the year, like all correspondences in Wicca, particularly, of course, speaking from my Corellian perspective, it has many different levels. It refers to the soul, it refers to our ordinary life, it refers to the cycles of the planet. When we look at the festival of Mabon, for example, it refers to the dusk of the day, but it also refers to moving into that last portion of life, the part that I'm personally in, the part that many of you may be in also. And this is a festival which happens to occur on the fall equinox, which is when day and night are equal. And at least in my background, we tend to think of that fall equinox as having to do with ideas of justice, having to do with ideas of harvest, and of really looking at what you have done, what you wish to do, where you've been and where you're going. And hello to Jan in the chat room. It's good to see you, Jan. You know, I think this is something that no matter what age we are, we probably should always be doing. But certainly as we become aware that we're growing older, it's something we should be very much aware of. You know, so often we get caught in all the daily things we do in life that we forget to look at the larger pictures. We think about whatever projects we're working on, not necessarily where they're ultimately leading. In my mind, the Feast of Mabon deals with those larger issues. It's looking at the map of your life. It's looking at where your life has been, where your life is going. If you think of it in terms of the day, it's the end of the day, not quite the beginning of the night, but you know that next phase is coming. For Samhain will be the beginning of the night. Yule will be midnight. and then in bulk will be the coming of the dawn. And as we think in these terms, we remember that everything is part of a cycle. And one of the things I do is I follow a number of Instagram accounts just for occasional entertainment. One of them is called Greater Days, and it is I guess we'd call it a memoir of stars of past generations out of Hollywood, many of whom are not living now. But one of the things you notice when you look at, they'll usually have at least 12 people they will emphasize on any given day who happen to have that birthday. They emphasize people on their birthdays. But one of the things you'll notice is the number of people who don't get to this point in life. I also follow one called Silence is Platinum, which deals specifically with the stars of the 20s. And it's the same thing. You see a lot of people, more in that generation, who died much younger than people do today. And it does remind you that growing older is, as they say, a privilege denied to many, and a privilege that we should be aware of as such. The ability to look at our lives, the ability to think about that last portion of our lives, again, whether it's a week, whether it's a year, whether it's 20 years, but to be able to look at it and say, well, I'm here. I need to think about this is a very great privilege that not everybody has. The first time I ever had to deal with the idea of death, I was probably, depending on how you want to look at it, I would say I was about 6 years old, and it had to do with my father and his situations. But I don't think I really understood it in those terms. But over the years, I've had situations like rupturing my back, my heart situation in February was the third that I've faced. And I've faced that issue of death and near-death experiences more than once. And it really has had a major influence on my life and the way that I live my life and the way that I expect to continue living my life. And I'm now at a point that I'm changing some of that focus, because part of what that did is it really made me very focused on the things I'd promised Spirit I would do in this life. And those promises are still there. Part of my reason for wanting to retire from the chancellorship was to be able to do more writing and teaching. And in fact, I have several books I'm working on now that I hope to bring out in the next 1 to 2 years. And this is just continuing that focus of what I've promised Spirit I would do in this life. And, having faced these issues so early, I think I had to make those decisions earlier than most people do. In some ways, they were right in front of me as a child, in others, certainly as an adult, that this life could end at any point. And that if I wanted to do the things I wanted to do, I'd better be doing them. And, I'm sure that attitude will continue with me for however long this life continues. And, one thing that I'm very aware of now, and really not for the first time, but particularly now, is that, this life could end on any day. A few weeks ago, I had an experience with heat exhaustion that some people are more aware of than others. But, at the time, we didn't really know what was happening. There was a theory that it was actually a stroke happening. Turned out it was simply heat exhaustion, a much less serious thing. But again, it reminds me, whatever I want to do, I'd best be doing. But the thing is, the fact that my life is reminding me of this now does not change the fact that it's always been the case. Um, so many people die much younger with no warning, and they don't necessarily have the chance to do many of the things they wanted to do, partly because they thought they had all the time in the world to do it. And if I have a message for people who are watching at this moment is don't think that you have all the time in the world. Understand that you have the time in front of you, whatever it may turn out to be. And enjoy your life. Live it. Well, live it as if it were the last day, because you never know. And also, in terms of the things you want to do in life, don't think you're going to do them later, although you might be able to. But be aware that working on them now is also very important. And hello to Donna in the chat room. And Donna says, I'm looking forward to reading your new books. And Donna says, every breath we take is a miracle. We survive by breathing something that we can't see. And you know, that's absolutely true. And it has a lot to do with how we have historically viewed spirit. In many languages, the word for spirit is the same word for breath. In Greek, the term psyche represents breath. And the idea was that not only the act of breathing, but all of this invisible energy that we know is there that keeps us alive is representative of spirit, which generally as pagans we perceived as being much more than just that physical reaction, but also a spiritual reaction at the same time. And the fact that we do survive by breathing something we can't see is a very interesting lesson to us in terms of looking at our relationship to spirit and looking at our relationship to ourselves, that the things that really keep us going are not always what we see. And the things we see in front of us are very important and we should not ignore them. But the things that we don't see, but are aware of if we pay attention, are just as important. And it's very, very important we not lose sight of those things. So, you know, as I look at the coming festival of Mabon, which again is a festival of justice, a festival of harvest, a festival of balance, I find myself really looking at the things that I've done in life and asking myself the question, you know, did I really do the good things I hoped to do? And I cannot answer that. I don't know that it can be answered while I'm actually living, but I certainly hope that I have done so. And, you know, I think any person looking at their lives would have to say the same thing, that others must judge whether what they did was actually good or bad. But we can reach certain conclusions for ourselves. I feel like I've taught a great many people, literally thousands of people, what I consider very good information on spirituality. I've taught them, for example, I often talk about when I started as a psychic reader, having known people who didn't know how to ground. Anyone who learned anything from me learned how to ground right off the top. And that potentially spared them negative experiences. They learned to do shadow work right off the top, which potentially spared them negative experiences. And ideally, they learned a practical way of looking at everything they were doing, which hopefully brought them positive experiences. So I'd like to think that I did a lot of good in this way. But again, I can only speak from my experience, and that isn't the only experience. Only time will tell how that's looked on. When I myself am no longer here. But it is, I think, um, something that I nonetheless can look at and not only make some assessment of what I've already done in life, but what I want to do next. As I say, I'm currently working on several books. I'm working on a book on conscious incarnation and world walking. I'm working on my autobiography, which should be a matter of some interest, I think, to some people. And both of these are still in their opening stages. And I've been working with Lady Crystal on a book on beginning magic, and will trying to adjust that book to people who have no background to work with. And we'll see which of these actually get completed, which gets completed first. But these are some of the things I'm working on, among other things I'm doing. And I have to say that they put your mind in a certain place. Working on your autobiography puts you in a very reflective mood. Assuming that you're not, assuming you have a realistic view of your life, it puts you in a reflective mood. Now, of course, as I say, none of us ever really have a realistic view of our life. We have a view of our experiences. One of my favorite autobiographies was Swanson on Swanson, written by Gloria Swanson, the great star of the silent era. And there's a wonderful scene in the movie Airport 75 where she is shown playing herself on a plane that is about to go down, at least theoretically. If you've seen Airport 75, you'll know it doesn't quite do that. But in the moment when everyone thinks they're about to die, she asks her assistant to give her the strong box to hold on to. And the assistant says, "Oh my God, yes, the jewels," and hands this strong box full of jewels to Gloria Swanson, who says, "To hell with the jewels," and empties them out on the floor. "Save my autobiography." I've always thought that was very amusing. And about 3 years later, she brought that autobiography out. And being a great fan of Swanson at that time, I got it right away. And the thing that I appreciate about it, but also that other people said, is that Swanson's autobiography was a very serene look at a life that had not been that serene. That she had taken the high road in writing the autobiography, and tried to be as complimentary as possible, and without being dishonest, but without being petty, which I think is very important. But if you read different people's autobiography, you see different ways they look at themselves. A lot of Hollywood personalities wrote tell-all biographies that went into things that many people wouldn't normally choose to mention in public, but also caused them to sell a lot of copies of the book. Some of them wrote autobiographies which you have to question how much of it's actually true. And then others wrote very sensible autobiographies, and it's very interesting to read the differences in how people viewed this. And you also have to ask yourself, in those that, like Swanson's biography, don't necessarily reflect their life as other people saw it, does that mean that that they weren't reflecting it as they saw it? When Swanson wrote her biography as being a more serene look at a life that had not always been serene, was it perhaps simply that as she was in her 70s when she was writing it, she had come to a serene point in her life and looked back on it all that way? That seems sensible to me. If you're writing your biography at 34, which I think most people would have very little business doing, but if you did that, you'd certainly look at it very differently than if you're writing it in your 70s. And this also has to do, I think, with things that we learn in life as we go forward. And I have to tell you, and I've said it before on this program, when I was 25 years old, I first became aware of mortality in the conventional sense. A lot of people in my generation became aware of their mortality when they turned 18 or 21 and realized that their youth was over. And sometimes looked at that very badly. But for me, that didn't come until I was 25. And at 25, I did realize, well, the first part of my life has passed now. And I happened to speak to my friend Paul Barrel of the Rowan Free Church about this. And his response was, don't worry about that. He was 44 at that time. And he said that he would not trade being in his 40s for being back in his 20s for anything in the world. And why not? And the answer is the difference in how he looked at things as an older, quote, older man. Everything was so much easier. Everything was so much more serene because he'd already faced so many things in life that in his 20s were brand new and therefore very worrisome in ways that in his 40s he'd simply shove off and not think about. And I have to say, looking back, he was absolutely right. And the older that you get, things really do look very different than when you're young. And I think that one of the things which as pagans we should do more than we do is when we look at that wheel of the year, and when we see it moving from Lammas to Mabon to Samhain to Yule, we should make more of the fact that these also represent the later stages in life. And maybe celebrate those things a little more, just as we should also celebrate a little bit more the fact that the earlier Sabbats celebrate the earlier stages in life. That every part of life has a moment of honor in our wheel of the year, and should also in our world. And I think, when we talk about coming of age ceremonies, the ones that we used in the Corellian tradition, the ones that I'm familiar with, involved older people welcoming younger people into their new phase in life and giving them advice. The ones I've been to involved both good advice and perhaps not so good advice, depending on who was speaking. But one of the best pieces of advice is to realize that how you're going to look at things will change, and most likely for the better. That as a young person, you are again facing things for the first time. They'll be far more challenging that first time than they will be the third or fourth time they come back. By that time, you'll look at it and say, yeah, I have to do this again. Okay, it's not that big a thing. And in many ways, that is how life can be. That's not to say that there aren't also new challenges that come. Let me tell you, I'm very much aware of the new challenges that have come with being in the last part of my life. I mentioned that my cardiac event back in February was the third major cardiac event I've had in my life, but the results of it were very different than previous ones. Previous ones, I largely just got up and kept going. That has not really been the case this time. And Donna says in the chat room, I wish that I could live my life over knowing what I know now. I would find a way to help more animals. I would not be afraid to use my magic abilities to help the animals and the earth. And, I think that's one of our goals in reincarnation. We don't necessarily remember those things in this life, but we may in the next. And when we do shadow work, when we do working with our higher selves, we try to bring these things through. So, yeah, you can't go back and live this life knowing the things you know now. But in your next life, maybe you will. One of the things that I've been very thoughtful of recently is the idea that when we leave this life, we don't take anything physical with us. And I've always loved physical things. I have been a great believer in beautiful pieces of art, such as this piece of jewelry, or this piece of jewelry. Great lover of books, a great lover of beautiful items. But I know perfectly well I won't be able to take any of that with me. And in fact, much of it I no longer own at this point. Partly an acknowledgement of that fact. And in many cases, I have happily been able to see it go to other people who hopefully will appreciate it as I did. But when we leave this world, what do we take with us? Well, what I've always understood is we take with us the relationships that we had to other people, to situations, even to ideas. Those things we carry forward as part of our soul. And one of the things I want to talk about in the next few days is the character of the soul, which is far more complex than just being a larger portion of our conscious mind. But when we leave this world, my understanding, based on many years of dealing with the spirits, is that this is what we take forward. And when we come back into this world, we will recognize those people we've known before. In some ways, we'll pick up where we left off, both for good and for bad. And I can say that when I came into this life, I had several karmic situations that needed to be dealt with. I hope that I did. And in pursuing the resolution of those karmic situations, I met the same soul several times as several different people, all expressing exactly the same qualities, along with other different qualities, but bringing the exact same situation back into my life until I realized that it had to be dealt with. One of them had been my father. And then there were several romantic relationships that very strongly resembled that same soul in female form, but nonetheless, I believe the same soul. And this is one of the things we do when we come back in life. We pick up our relationships again. I think that I finally did learn the lessons of that relationship, and basically made an end of it. Which, of course, is part of what we do when we realize the lessons of our karma, when we untangle that karma. There are certainly other relationships as well, but that was the one that's most memorable to me. I certainly believe we don't have anywhere near time to talk about conscious incarnation, but from a very early age, I have understood myself to be a conscious incarnate. And pulling through knowledge from that life began long before I knew about it. As a small child, there were things that would later make metaphysical sense to me that I already had, in one form or another. Things that had come into my mind that had no real way to be there, except that I was drawing on previous lifetimes. So while we can't go back and relive our life in this world, knowing what we already know, in some ways in our next life, we do. Not all of it necessarily, but what's most important, that we don't necessarily remember it in the sense that we remember things in this life. What we remember are the qualities for the most part. We recognize the relationships, we recognize where they have importance to us. But sometimes we do remember more. We'll talk more about that maybe tomorrow. So I see that we've come to the end of our half hour. I've actually gone a little longer than I sometimes go. And I want to thank you for joining me today. And I love talking to all of you. I hope that you are enjoying the different conversations we're having. This next few days, as I say, we're likely to talk a little bit about spirit and maybe a little bit about issues of incarnation. And one of the reasons is these books I'm working on. They've put my mind in this direction as well as just where I'm at in life. So I want to thank you for joining me, and let us close with our prayer, as we always do. And Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to guide us as we go forward, not only in this life, but between lives, and help us to carry forward the things that are most important to us. Help us to learn the lessons most important to us. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives. We know you're always with us. But from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And I will see you tomorrow.